Our next session is on smart cities. And we have two incredible speakers joining us, Mr. Alabbar, founder and chairman of Emaar Properties, and Mr. Al-Nasser, group CEO of Saudi Telecom. Thank you. Nice to see you. So, Mr. Alabbar, perhaps we can start with you. What is next for global society?
Well, first, give me a chance to really say thank you to everybody who's involved in this amazing event, and I would like to congratulate His Majesty and His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, and my colleagues in PIF for really hosting this amazing event, and the amazing people who come and attend it and getting stronger and stronger, so congratulations, well done. This is a big, simple question, and I guess it depends on when you ask it. So if you ask the question these days, I think when you look at all the protests around the world, it's almost like it stops you from thinking. And if you are socially responsible, you say, well, I can talk about smart cities, I can talk about connectivity, I can talk about all this stuff. But I think that's, to be socially responsible, you really have to see that, whatever we do, and all of us here, and including you and the amazing speakers, is that, we're all about innovation, we're all about progress, for profit, of course, but for our society as well. So the thing that really we need to kind of combine and link is that how can we really link all the greatness of these minds and the technology and the great government policies and so forth, and to really just improve human life. So we have lists of the yellow vests, we have less trouble in South America, we have less trouble in Europe, we have quietness in Lebanon maybe, and maybe in Asia as well. So I think you have to combine all the stuff that we talk about and the reality on the ground is that, we speak about these amazing things, but how is that really going to affect the stuff we see on the street, which is basically people revolting for better life? And I'm sure between great governments and great private sector, that can be sorted.
I think that's a really important thing to remember, is the human element in this debate and discussion on smart cities. But equally profound is some of the technological innovations that are going in, and the telcos are at the center of that innovation as well. So Mr. Nasser, could you tell us about some of the enabling factors, including technologies, that you are seeing emerge in smart cities?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Aisha. I believe connectivity is at the core of whatever you need to do in terms of smart cities or the new transformation that's being required at different industries. So whether at the fiber level or at the mobile level, and 5G is now even giving a step change to the way the transformation that's happened in the past compared to today. I'm glad that I am, following the minister, talk about what's happening at the national level. He already shed some lights on what's happening at the transformational impact of the infrastructure in the country, which is a pillar of the enablement of the digitization and the 2030 vision. Alhamdulillah, I believe that we are more geared to claim that we are one of the pioneers in this field. The 5G was launched mid of last year at the country level, and the promise of the 5G is even beyond what we think. So that's from the connectivity perspective. If we go to what we need to have a smart city, the connectivity is the foundation, but you need other elements. You need to sensor almost everything. And that's where IoT has to come in play. And I'm proud to say that almost all our sites today are well equipped with narrowband IoT, which is the latest technology. So this is, by sensoring everything, you get the information, you can have the commands, you can do the operation, you can do the change, and you can do the big analytics, artificial intelligence, all the things by sensoring everything. Cloud complement this one, where you have the superpower, the supercomputing that's required to make sure that you can handle and aggregate this kind of level of information and the interaction among different verticals and industries. And on top of that, where the AI comes on a vertical level, so that for efficiency, for automation, for taking the actions, utilizing this data. So these are the 4 pillars, and alhamdulillah, I'm proud to say that as a country, we're progressing on all 4 dimensions to make sure that we are geared for the future.
I think it's been really inspiring and exciting for me also, and the audience, I'm sure, to learn about, again, as I mentioned earlier with the minister, the speed and execution with which some of these initiatives are happening right here. While the public sector, the telcos, and the government are important, Mr. Alabbar, what is the role of the private sector in the smart city?
Well, I think the private sector, of course, we'll have to agree that I think driven mainly by efficiency, by its objectives, by profitability, but I really think that's not good enough anymore. I think we as private sector as well, and the private sector in general, is that I think without a society that's functioning right, that's balanced, I don't think there is room for private sector. It's a fact of life, right? But also when we question that, the struggle that we have, and you look at these magnificent, huge, private entities, which is basically a new phenomenon in the world that we really do not know how to deal with. As an example, how Apple pays Google $12 billion a year only to put, their Google on their phones. These large companies, including us as well, is that what are we really doing for the well-being of society? Many great companies, they do so much, to focus on values. That beside profit, what are the values? And there's an internal struggle in companies. But the good news is that I think a lot of great companies, they're really taking advantage of that and moving in the right to balance. My personal criticism, I really think that these big, giant, mammoth monopolies, the Googles, the Facebooks, and the others, I don't think these guys are doing enough, because $12 billion, you could solve probably the problem of 5 countries if you were to kind of support it indirectly instead of paying it to Apple. But I guess they want to be a monopoly. Google want to be a monopoly, so they have to pay it to Apple. But I really believe that more and more of these entities are really doing better. I think when we discuss it openly like this, you've got a lot of amazing groups in the world that remind businessmen like us to say, hey, you are doing, but you're not doing enough. So I think the path is not that easy, but there are amazing examples of organization going that route, or taking that route.
I think it's really heartwarming to see this emphasis again and again on again, human-centered smart cities. We saw it with His Excellency, the Minister, speaking about the importance of inclusiveness and the digitalization roadmap.
And I would like to say, I don't think it has to do with rules or regulation. Yeah. I really think it has to do with good, pure human beings who succeed and they do well and they say, listen, great. What else? Now I'm successful, but I owe it to so many people. What am I going to do about it? And I really think that there are an amazing number of people who set the example for all of us to follow.
I think that one of the things we keep hearing about is that, who should be in the ecosystem that puts together, and that comes back to the values they bring in, et cetera, the smart city programs. Mr. Al-Nasser, how important is the partnership between governments and the private sector when building smart city programs?
I believe the partnership is essential for successful of such project. Private sector will play a key role into the smart cities, yet the patronage from the government, whether from legislative point of view, whether from processes point of view, from subsidy, His Excellency the Minister mentioned about what happened in the fiber and the 5G from the subsidy from the government to make sure that whatever not viable from business perspective is being incentivized. So I believe it is a complementary role. Legislation has to play a role, and I believe digitization, even of the government process and processes, should play a major role into the smart city. I believe that digitization of government processes, one-stop shop, having drones, etc., to make sure that the environment is conducive for the private sector to be able to leapfrog in the smart cities domain. So it is a combination of both.
I think one of the things that we speak about is once you lay the infrastructure, then how do you help the local economies? How is the data that you're working on helping the local economies, the big data leading to actually change with the smaller companies? Mr. Alabbar, what are your thoughts on that? Once the infrastructure is there, now the next step in terms of the small businesses?
Well, the big question here, I think for all of us, is that we have to ask who owns the data. You know, I mean, if the big giants, they know how many minutes I stay in the shower or in the bathroom because, you know, they're linked to my phone. So that data is mine, but they're selling advertising on my behavior, right? So it's a big debate. I don't know who owns the data, but if it's my data, then I own it, but never mind. I would like to say that if I were to just take a small example of our Noon platform in the region, you can see that there's so much you can collect, so valuable. But then again, you know, you are going to use it for your commercial needs. But how much of it is going back to all the connectivity that the city have beside a platform like Noon and understanding, you know, shoppers' behavior and so forth. But what else are you going to do about this information? And I really believe from the small example of what we see every day, you know, few million people on our platform and we watch their behavior, I really think that great human being in most of us is that we come back and say, okay, that's great, but how can that add to the Saha platform that His Excellency mentioned to really look after our people better? How can we do that? Or if you were to get, you know, more information from the other sensors that you put everywhere in the city, how can we really improve the quality of human life? If it's the education, or if it's behavior, or if it's cleanliness, or if it's clean water, if it's conserving, you know, conserving energy, if it's serving the older people more. So how can we really improve the well-being of this society? So if we are concerned about what's going on in South America and people protesting, or in Lebanon people are protesting, or other parts of the world, how can we really take all that data and genuinely add value to government decisions, adds value to business decisions, so we really enhance the value of the life of the people who live with us, our families and our kids and our friends and our neighbors.
So really creating value for all out of the data. And yet, now with 5G, there is going to be a data explosion. Yes. Mr. Al-Nasser, you know, you've been talking about 5G in the kingdom. How do you think 5G will further transform the smart city?
What I look at the 5G is not, you know, as an incremental evolution to the previous generation. I believe it is a step function change compared to previous generations. You know, in the previous generation, usually the difference is a throughput, as you know, that this speed, you go from X to Y in terms of speed. But if you look at the 5G, it's about latency, it's about the multi-access edge computing, it's about slicing, it's about a lot of capability that goes well above and beyond the previous generations of the mobility. So I believe personally that 5G is at the core of the fourth industrial revolution, at the core of whatever we do. We are looking at, His Excellency mentioned about the virtual reality. I believe the 5G with its latency and coupled with the edge computing will play a vital role, where it will be a lifestyle changer to the people. If you look at the health and the operations, you know, remote operations, etc., 5G will play a great role. If you look at the industrialization and different verticals, 5G is the core of the thing. So what I believe is that the demand that the supply of the 5G will create, we are only, you know, scratching the surface of that demand, and a lot of application coupled with artificial intelligence. And if I just want to pick on the data issue that Mohammed mentioned, I believe artificial intelligence as a capability was there for decades. But what is fueling artificial intelligence today is the data that we are collecting through different sensors, through different apps, through different interaction. How many times does a person touches his smartphone per hour compared to a conventional communication that is in the past. So with this in mind, if you take the 5G with the cloud, with multi-access edge computing, that's what revolutionized almost everything we do in life today.
I think indeed the 5G revolution is coming upon us. And one of the things that we have to remember in all this, Mr. Alabbar, as you've mentioned, is the social transformation that it brings with this. So, if you have any final thoughts on this idea of the human element in technology, that would be great to hear.
Well, again, it depends which part of the world. And if you were you ask me this question, and I'm American, I'll probably give you a different answer compared to somebody in China, or maybe China and the Middle East are quite similar. But I just look at my neighborhood and answer your question. Is that we need to educate people better. We need to shorten. The scale of 3G is going to give us a scale of shortening, the path of progress if it's really education, which I think is going to happen. Healthcare, which is so critical for all of us. I think more importantly also is that what are we doing to enable all of that to educate our kids and educate ourselves? Because I think, the business of education, it's one thing that we send our kids to school or keep them educated, but I think the flow of data and the flow of information through this incredible machine, and the value of all that to our, processing ability is something very close to, personally, it's the most valuable thing for me, if you tell me, because I think this thing, even though the skull is the limit of what I can do because of the size of our brain, but at the same time, how can we have all that and add it to really improve our capability to do more? So looking at the Middle East, I really believe that, I always give this very boring example. I said, during my dad's days, even though he doesn't read or write, but there was no electricity, there's no running water, and now our kids have this flow of information that's just flabbergasting, which means that their capability compared to my dad's ability and my mom's ability, where electricity comes in 3 hours a day or sometimes 1 hour a day, is so massive. And I really think that this value, the true value of our discussion is that enriching our society from education to infrastructure to learning, to become a better human being, that you can deal with work, that you can innovate more, that you can do more. More importantly, that our young people can start their businesses or their ideas and just go to the world and do business with the world, because there's no more boundaries now. I don't really have to go and open this factory or that shop. I can just open it up and do business with the world. So, and I really appreciate, all the work that the government of Saudi Arabia and in the region, the governments are doing to really connect our society, create this revolution in technology to enrich people's life for better living and better economic progress.
Mr. Nasser, my final question to you, given that we have discussed the potential of smart cities at every level to transform work, play, education, healthcare, you are in the driver's seat of one of the great platforms at Telecom that is building this smart city as a platform. What are the main components of a smart city initiative?
I believe, it is like a fit for purpose. Smart cities is a quite fluid statement, so everybody's looking. I believe the gap will decide where you tackle. You cannot tackle everything almost at the same time, so where you start. From my perspective, I believe one of the major, incremental impact of transforming the cities is the transportation. Look at how much you do in terms of the planet, environment, of term of the efficiency of people, in term of the energy, in term of the quality time that people can spend. If you only transform the transportation, data comes at the core of that transformation, but this is one of the dimensions. The same goes to, the health, the services that whether it's public or private services, the surveillance, so you can span almost everything, smart homes, but I believe transformation with what's happening at urbanization. Cities becomes more dense and dense. It's expected by 2025 that more than 5 billion will stay in cities. So this strain the resources in terms of infrastructure, in terms of all different resources. So there will be a big impact by just working on the transportation and transforming the transportation with its associate, whether it is a parking, whether it is the streets, whether it is the methodology of operation and transforming people, whether it is the congestion management, mobility behavior, all mobility pattern, all related aspect of transportation. I believe that always at the core of the pain of the smart cities today.
And if I just want to add that I really think one of the critical things that we have to keep in mind when we talk about smart cities, we should really think simple, because smart cities, people can take you over a menu about 45,000 things, and I absolutely agree with you, is that there are basic things that we can get a lot of value out of when we think about smart cities. So the mobility is so critical. I think that, for example, I give you an example. We typically master plan large sites. Just using AI to lay down our buildings, only to study shade, because we in the Middle East, shade is more important than air for us, for example, because of heat. We study, and it's all through AI and technology, and that's really smart city. We come in and lay down, for example, all of our parks with our buildings, and we study airflow. And then you move a few buildings around, and there's a better airflow, there's better temperature in that environment. But then again, even when it comes to, say, for example, we put in all these roads and highway lights as an example. Just by having this being modeled through our systems, and it's all intelligent systems, you can really realize that maybe we should have 50% less lights in certain areas. That alone, not only, I don't think it's so much about saving money, but I really think it's about caring for the society and the environment and being efficient and being responsible. So these are a very powerful example that you touched on. I totally agree.
Thank you.
And I'm also especially a big fan of the idea of mobility as part of smart cities. My PhD is on smart cities and mobility. So please join me in thanking these very interesting and pertinent remarks on smart cities. Thank you very much.